Okay, thank you very much. So, well, first of all, I'd like to thank Vladas and the other organizers for organizing this great conference with such impressive dimensions. And second, well, thank you very much. I'm very grateful for this very kind attention. And well, now I have a lot of pressure. I have to be interesting now, otherwise. Okay. Okay, so. So this is the sequel of this series of lectures with Jean-François Le Gall on continuum limit of random discrete objects. So in the first three lectures, Jean-François presented the scaling limits, basically, of trees and labeled trees. And so this is really getting me to the core of this lecture, which is to study different kind of discrete objects, which are maps. Okay, so maps, in some sense, they are generalizations of trees, in the sense that they are also graphs that you can draw in the plane. Okay, but of course, these graphs are going to have cycles, loops, and so on. And their study is, much more complicated than the one for trees. But we'll see in this lecture how, in some sense, we can bring back the study of these planar maps to the study of the labeled trees that Jean-François has been introducing. Okay, and okay, so today I will mostly focus on the purely combinatorial aspects of this. Maybe in the end, if I have time, I will give you a first application of probabilistic application and open the path to the next lecture, which will be really to study scaling limits of these objects. Okay, so. Let me start with a couple of definitions. So let me start with defining what a planar map is. So in the sequel, in fact, I will always be interested in a planar map. Planar means that the maps I'm considering are embedded into the sphere, or if you want, the blackboard. And when I will talk about maps, in fact, I will always be interested in planar maps. So definition. So a planar map is a graph which is embedded in the two-dimensional sphere, which I will denote by S2. And I ask that this graph is connected and finite. Okay? So what do I really mean by embedded? So sometimes we also say properly embedded. It means that this graph is really, so you have the two spheres here. And the graph is going to be a collection of simple paths drawn inside the sphere. And when I say simple path, a priori, I also allow the possibility to have loops, okay, paths which end and start at the same point, okay, and I also allow to have multiple edges, okay. So it's in graph theory, it's rather called a multi-graph than a graph, but let me still call it a graph, okay. And so I ask that the set of vertices, which are the endpoints of the set of edges, is finite, and the set of edges is finite as well, okay? And by embedding, I mean that the edges should not cross, okay? The interior of the edges should be pairwise disjoint, okay? Of course, edges can meet, but only at the incident vertices, okay? So, okay, so I will usually denote such a map by letter M. And so M is really the data of the set of vertices, and the set of edges. So I don't want to be too precise about what I call an edge, really. So I'm more precise in the notes. But at this point, I really want to convey a visual idea of what a planar map is. Okay? So when you have an edge, so it's a simple path here, you can decompose it into two oriented edges, okay? One with each orientation. So an edge, you can see it really as a pair of E and E bar, where this E is an oriented edge, and this is the reversal of E. Okay, it's the edge, the same edge, but with reversed orientation. And such an oriented edge will have a starting and an ending point. Okay, so I call E minus and E plus the source and target of the oriented edge E. Okay, so actually the set of oriented edge, I will denote it, it's a useful notation, by E with an arrow here, okay? All right. So what does a planar map means, more than having just a graph, okay? When you have a planar map, okay, you have, of course, a graph structure, but you also have this embedding structure, which really tells you more. In particular, around each vertex, if you go in a clockwise order around a vertex, so the sphere, of course, is an orientable surface, so you have a clockwise order. Okay, and sorry, this is the trigonometric order, so I will usually go counterclockwise. Okay, then you have a certain ordering of the edges, or the oriented edges, that start at this vertex. Okay, and in the same way, in this embedding, you have faces, okay, which are the connected components of the complementary of the edges. Okay, so a face of a map M is a connected component of the two sphere minus the map. Okay, so I'm being a little loose here. Okay, what I mean really is the union of the images of the edges of M. Okay, and it turns out that since the graph is connected, all the faces really are topological disks. Okay, so all the faces, say F in the set F of M, which is the set of faces, are homeomorphic to unit disk, say. Okay, and this is really it's not so trivial. I mean, if I had taken another surface as the sphere, this wouldn't be true. For instance, if you take the torus and take one of the generating circles of the torus, when you remove this circle, what you obtain is a cylinder, which is not homeomorphic to a disk. Okay, but again, I'm interested only in graphs embedded into this particular surface, which is the sphere. And in this case, it's a consequence of, well, an elaborate consequence of the Jordan curve theorem. But it's true that all the faces really are disks. Okay, so in particular, you can really see these disks or these faces are as polygons, okay, which are bounded by the oriented edges that you obtain when going counterclockwise around this polygon. Okay, so we can view it. We can view F as a polygon bounded by oriented edges in counterclockwise order. Okay, so for instance, this map here, you can represent it in a slightly different way. So let's say you have this central triangle here, and you have the three oriented edges that go around it. Then below you have this triangle with an extra edge in it. So this is something like that. Okay, and you have, again, the edges that bound this polygon. So this is this one. Then you have another polygon on the other side, which goes a little like this. And then you have, well, a polygon with only one side, which is this one. And then you have, finally, a polygon that goes around the map. I mean, around this picture. Okay? So if you want, for now, I've drawn two different pictures, of course, here and there. But I really want to say that these pictures convey the same combinatorial information. Okay, so you should really imagine here that this yellow area here is an area where I identify the points which are facing each other. Okay. And somehow, you see that every face here, you can really see it as a polygon. And the data of a map is really a set of polygons in which you have glued the edges on the boundary pairwise in such a way that you obtain, in the end, a surface which is homeomorphic to the sphere. Okay? So this allows me to introduce some notation. Okay, so when you have an oriented edge E, the map M, you call Fe the face incident to E, which is equal to the face lying to the left of E. Okay, or if you prefer, with this description here, a face is just bounded by the incident oriented edges. Okay, so in particular, this oriented edge is incident to this face, but the reversal of this edge is incident to a different face. Okay? Of course, it's possible that you have two edges which are incident to the same face, and this is the case for these two edges, for instance. Okay? And we call the degree of a face F belonging to the set of faces of M, which is degree of F equal to the number of edges that are incident to it. Okay, so for instance, of course, the degree, so maybe I should write it in another color. The degree here is 3. The degree here is 1. Okay. When I want to see this exterior face here, then I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I really have a pentagon here. And then here I really have also degree 5 because I go twice around this edge. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And here I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's a quadrangle. Okay. Of course, the degree of a vertex so maybe I didn't say it before, but I will usually denote V as V of M and E as E of M. The degree of a vertex is just the number of edges or oriented edges such that the source of E is equal to V. Okay, it's the usual graph theoretic notion of degree. So another another notion which will help me in the further descriptions of bijections between maps and trees that I will give is a slightly less proper notion, which is called the notion of corner. So when you have a face F, the set of faces of the map M, so again you should see it as a polygon. Of course, this polygon can be can have sort of double points. Okay, it can be something like that. Okay, so this is my face F. And with every oriented edge of the boundary, I can define the corner associated to this edge E as a little neighborhood, say simply connected neighborhood, based at the origin of E. Okay, so the corner of E is a neighborhood, small neighborhood, of the origin of E minus intersected with the incident face FE. Okay? So of course, I mean, there is not one corner, you have a whole family of corners, but let's say that when I speak about a corner in a face, I choose once and for all one corner for each half edge, okay, in such a way that these corners do not intersect each other. Okay? So in particular, here, I have one corner for each vertex here, and you should be careful to the fact that one vertex can have several distinct corners. Okay? For instance, this one here has one corner incident to this oriented edge, and one corner incident to this oriented edge. Okay? And then you have these corners here and there. And again, here you have two different corners around this vertex. Okay, so this is something that's going to be useful for me. Okay. So now I want to be a little more specific about, in some sense, the relation between these two pictures here. I really want to consider maps as a combinatorial family, family of the enumerable family of objects. I really want to do combinatorics here. So in particular, I will not be interested in the particular drawing of a given map. I want to extract somehow the combinatorial information that is in this picture. So actually defining maps by this kind of embedded graphs is not the most straightforward way of seeing this combinatorial information. There are other definitions in which you see right from the beginning that maps form a discrete family, but they are much less visual. Okay, so let me stick to this visual picture, and in fact we'll say that two maps are going to be identified. They are going to be the same if, in some sense, I can deform the first picture to get the second one in a continuous way. Okay, so I have to be a little bit more specific about that. So notice that, the notion of isomorphism. Okay, so notice that if I have an homomorphism, of the sphere onto itself, so that's a homeomorphism. And if M is a map, then in fact I can, induce a new map by just making H act on the set of vertices and edges of M. Okay, and so I didn't define in a very precise way what edges are, but of course you can, you can say, for instance, that edges, they are just, paths in the sphere, so you just compose them to the left, on the left with H, and you get another path, so it gives you another edge. Okay? So H, say that H sends the map M, and on another map, so H sends the map M to another map M prime. Okay? Basically, it sends the edges of M to the edges of M prime. And in this case, well, I will not say that M prime is the same map as M unless H is also something that preserves the orientation. Okay? I don't want to say that the mirror image of this map, is the same map. Okay? I really want to consider only maps in which the orientation is preserved. Okay? Which is coherent, with the fact that what I said before. What's important to me is somehow the order in which the edges are organized around each vertex, or the way that the oriented edges are organized in counterclockwise order around each face. Okay? So if H is orientation preserving, we say that M and M prime are isomorphic. Okay? And in the sequel, we always, well, we almost always identify isomorphic maps. Okay? So what does that mean? Well, for instance, if you take this map here, okay, well, you can say that, of course, this picture is just the same as this slightly distorted picture. So let's say something like that. Okay, I really did nothing here. But it's going to be different from this picture. And this for a very simple reason. It's that, of course, the isomorphisms here, they preserve the degrees, of the elements of your map. So, of course, in this case, the degrees of the vertices are preserved. In fact, the graph structure is the same. But if you look at the degree of this face, you get 2. Here you get 3. And then around you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is, of course, the same here. And here you get 2, 5. Oh, my God. Been very unlucky. Okay. Say this. That's better. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So you see that the degrees of the faces here are certainly different. So these maps cannot be isomorphic. Okay? And when you do this identification, then it turns out that the set of maps up to isomorphism, so let's say M is isomorphic to M prime, this is a countable set. Okay. Okay, so now to finish this description of maps, I want to end with one important notion, which is the notion of a rooted map. So the problem when you deal with maps is that maps can have a lot of symmetries. Okay, so what do I call a symmetry? Actually, so definition. So an automorphism of M is an isomorphism of M with itself. Okay? So this means, in fact, that an automorphism is just a symmetry of your map. Okay? So for instance, this is a map, and of course it has symmetries. Okay? You can rotate the picture. You can also turn the sphere around, and you have, a certain group of automorphisms here. And in some sense, you want to get rid of that. I mean, this is a real problem when you want to deal with enumeration of these maps. Okay? Because when you count maps and you have symmetries, well, sometimes you count maps too many times somehow. So a useful trick to get rid of that is to do what we call a routing. So a routed map. So it's a pair M-E, where M is a map, and E is a fixed, distinguished, oriented edge of M. Okay? So in the sequel, I will almost always consider rooted maps. So usually I will drop this if from the notation, and it will be clear that somewhere you have a distinguished edge. Okay? And so the point is that, of course, when you have a rooted map, so the notions of iso and automorphisms extend to rooted maps. Okay? And it means that, well, basically the homeomorphism that you have here should send the root to the root of M to the root of M prime with preserved orientation. Okay? Should preserve the root edges. Okay? So again, I will always identify two rooted maps which are isomorphic. And the point is that, in fact, so the proposition, so an automorphism of rooted map is trivial. So what do I mean by that? I'm not saying, of course, that H has to be the identity, but H induces, it really sends the map M on the very same embedded graph. Okay? So why is that so? Well, let's take again the example of the square, which is still on the blackboard. And imagine that now we have a certain edge which is distinguished. Well, in that case, if you take an automorphism of this picture here, then, of course, you have to preserve the edge. Okay? So H has no choice but to send this edge onto itself with the same orientation. But then if you think a little bit about it, it means that H also will have to send this neighboring edge to itself. Okay? And then by propagating inside the graph, since it's connected, it really has to preserve all the edges. Okay? So it's I'm being very vague here, but of course, this should be clear somehow. I mean, that's, okay, so this one really has no more symmetries. Okay, so I think I'm basically finished with my overall description of maps, and now I will try to focus on a particular class, okay, which is going to be the core object of interest in the remaining of the lectures. Okay, so let me give now a little bit of motivation for the rest of the talk and the rest of the lectures. So motivation. So we want to consider random maps. So what I mean by random maps is really a map picked, say, uniformly among a certain class, so a certain finite class of maps with a size that goes to infinity. Okay, so say I pick at random a map with a very large number of edges among some given family, a finite family of maps. Okay? And I want to send the size of the map to infinity. So actually, you already know an example of that, okay? Because the plane trees that have been considered before by Jean-François, they are indeed maps, okay? Well, he introduced them in a kind of combinatorial way. He described them as a certain set of integer-valued words, okay? But of course, he's already drawn many pictures of maps. Okay? When you have a tree, you can draw the edges from one parent to its children. And remember that there is really an order in the children. You have the first, the second, the third children of every vertex. Okay? So it really induces a unique, well-defined map. Actually, this could be another definition of plane trees. I mean, these are maps with only one face. Okay. Of course, they have only one face because of the Jordan curve theorem. Okay. If they have two faces, then I mean, if they have a cycle, then they induce two faces, and conversely. Okay. So in this case, you know, we already know a similar problem. We take, say, a plane tree at random in the set of plane trees with n edges. We let n go to infinity, and we try to look at the geometric property of this space. And we already know that when you rescale the length in the tree by square root of n, then we have a convergence, you know, in the sense of the second lecture, the Gromov-Hausdorff sense, to the limiting object, which is the continuum random tree. Okay? So this is the same thing that we are going to consider here. So say if I take a map Mn at random here, I want to consider the set of vertices of Mn and put the graph distance dmn on it. So this is really the graph distance, which is defined by, well, the graph distance inside the map M between two vertices u and v is the mean of all k's, such that there exists a path from u to v with length k. So a path, of course, is just a sequence of edges, okay, which every edge points at a point, at a vertex, which is the starting point of the next edge. Okay? And usually these paths, I mean, these paths in graphs, they are called also chains. Okay? So this gives me a random metric space, and I want to look at the geometry of this space. Okay? In particular, as n goes to infinity, you know, if this class is not too weird, then you expect that typically the graph distances inside this map are going to explode. And so you really have to have a renormalization in front of the distance here. And we'll try to see what kind of renormalization we should put in front. Okay? So maybe I should say that this motivation does not come from nothing. I mean, you know, why would one study this kind of problems? Well, actually, historically, should say it comes really from the physics literature. Okay, it's so. It didn't really start with him, but mainly Ambjorn and his co-authors was the first to really try to view maps as, you know, discrete versions of a certain continuum object. This continuum object appearing in a physics theory which is called the two-dimensional quantum gravity. So for us, maybe it's a little fancy name, but it really means that, you know, in some sense, you have to take a surface at random. Okay? And, you know, it's not so uncommon to probabilists because you can see Brownian motion, for instance, as, you know, taking a path at random. And this path is really the scaling limit of, you know, many discrete objects like the simple random walk and other random walks. Okay? In this case, it's exactly the same. You should really see these maps as a discretized version of the two-dimensional sphere. And by letting n go to infinity, you really consider an approximation of a continuum surface. Okay, so this is really the, say it was the first motivations going back to the 90s. And, well, from a mathematical point of view, people were a little stuck because it turns out that these graph distances are very difficult to study in maps. Okay? Of course, maps, they have been studied way before the 90s, you know, I mean, with, say, the four-color theorem, and in part, you know, the enumeration study of maps really started with Stutt in the 60s, and there is a huge literature on that. But the problem is that the methods that come from these enumeration techniques, they are usually powerless to give precise information on these distances. Okay? And so this is where today's story begins, really, because it turns out that, well, starting in the beginning of the 80s, but really exploding at the end of the 90s, it turned out that there was a method completely different to Tutt's methods and other methods coming from matrix integrals and such, which allowed to give indeed precise information about the distances. Okay, so this is where I want to get. So quadrangulations. And the Corey-Vauquelin, Schaeffer, bijection. Okay, so now let me say exactly what kind of class of maps we are going to study. So let Qn be the set of maps Q such that Q has n faces. Of course, these maps are planar and rooted. Okay? This is always implicit. So Q has n faces. And for every f belonging to the set of faces of Q, we have degree of f is equal to 4. Okay, so this set is called the quadrangulations with n faces. Okay, so you should really see it as take n quadrangles and glue the edges pairwise so that to obtain the sphere. Okay. So why is this object interesting? Well, okay, first of all, as described in the notes, it could look as if this object was coming from out of nowhere. Okay, but if you look at the notes, in fact, it turns out that Qn is really in a one-to-one correspondence, with a very natural correspondence, with the set of all maps with n edges, okay, which is maybe from the point of view of what I described before, is a slightly more natural class to consider. Okay, but at least it has this motivation of, in fact, being no more restrictive than general maps in some sense. Okay, and well, another interesting thing about that is, well, how many objects are there in this collection? Okay, it turns out that the answer, so proposition, so due to Tutt. In fact, Tutt really enumerated maps with n edges, but as I said, this is the same here from the enumerative point of view. So the cardinality of Qn is given by the very simple formula, which is 2 over n plus 2 times 3 to the n times 1 over n plus 1 2n choose n. Okay? And of course, when you look at this formula, well, if you went to Nicolas' example classes, then it's very famous, of course, but you know that this quantity here is nothing but the cardinality of the set of plane trees with n edges. Okay, it's a Catalan number. So this is really equal to the cardinality of the set A, n introduced in the first lectures. But there's more to that. I mean, you have this 3 to the n in front, and if you remember this, when you multiply 3 to the n times the cardinality of n, well, basically what you have is, well, on every edge of a tree in AN, you put a decoration among 3 possible decorations. Okay, so this is in fact exactly the same as the labeled trees that were introduced in the last lecture. Okay, so this is really 2 over n plus 2 times the cardinality of Tn, okay, where Tn is the set of well-labeled trees or labeled trees introduced before. Okay? So viewing this formula, I mean, this formula was obtained by Tutt. Somehow, when you first see it, it really looks like a black box. You know, you basically write the generating functions for these classes of quadrangulations or maps, And then he had this very powerful method for solving this equation, but it's only formal manipulations. And in the end, well, applying, say the Lagrange inversion formula, you end up with this formula. Okay, but it doesn't tell you somehow why this formula should be true. Okay, in the sense that, well, when you see that, you should guess somehow that there are simple objects hidden behind these. Okay. So that's actually what Corey and Vauquelin tried to do. I mean, let's try to find the trees that lie behind these maps or these quadrangulations. Okay, and they actually came up with a bijection, but one of the problems is that it was not completely satisfactory in the sense that this prefactor here 2 over n plus 2 was a little hard to explain. Okay, and somehow, I mean, these bijections remained unemployed for almost 20 years until Schaeffer came back with a new view at this enumeration and, I mean, these bijective approaches of maps, and really started to see that there was something about these bijections. Okay, so so I will now describe what this Corey-Vauquelin-Schaeffer bijection does. Okay, so let me see. Okay. Okay, so first of all, maybe I should say that if Q belongs to Qn, then, so the number of faces is n, and the degree of every face is 4. So every face is bounded by 4 oriented edges. Okay, so the total number of oriented edges should be 4 times the total number of faces of Q, which is 4n. Okay, and since every edge corresponds to to 2 oriented edges, the number of edges of Q should be equal to 2n. Now, what is the number of vertices of an element Q in Qn? Well, there is a very useful and famous formula, which actually I should have recalled before, but for every map, you have the Euler formula. So M a map. So here I really should say a planar map, because otherwise, the same formula is not true, saying that the number of vertices of M minus the number of edges plus the number of faces is equal to 2. Okay? It's actually easy to check in the planar case. I mean, I can leave it as an exercise. It's also a very instructive exercise. So, in particular, the number of vertices is equal to, well, twice, I mean, the number of edges, so 2n, minus n plus 2. Okay, so this is equal to n plus 2. And this is true for any quadrangulation. Okay, so this is something that's going to be useful. Another thing which is good to know, it's not going to be really needed in the following, is that any Q belonging to Qn is a bipartite graph. So what does that mean? Well, for planar maps, it means either that all the faces have even degree, which is the case in here, but it also means it's equivalent in the case of planar maps to the fact that you can color the vertices of the maps in 2 colors, say black and white, in such a way that no 2 vertices of the same color are neighbors. Okay, so you can find what you call a bicoloration of Q. So no 2 incident adjacent vertices have same color. Okay, so these are properties that are good to know. Okay, now the Corey-Vauquelin-Schaeffer bijection, so CVS bijection, So sometimes I will just say maybe Schaeffer bijection. It's more known like this in the literature. So the Curie-Vauquelin-Schaeffer bijection, it's really a bijection from the set of labeled trees onto the set of quadrangulations, except that here it couldn't be right, of course, because this is enumerated by 3 to the n times Catalan n. This is enumerated, as we know, as 2 over n plus 2 times this number, okay? So there is something missing here, and what is missing actually is that, well, here I should double the cardinality of this set by adding a choice of a certain parameter in -1 plus 1, okay? And here I should enrich this set by a choice of a distinguished vertex in Qn. So this is really the set of the pairs Q and V, such that Q belongs to Qn, and V belongs to the set of vertices of Q. Okay? So in particular, now this is completely coherent, because the cardinality of that, well, as you see, for every quadrangulation, there are n plus 2 choices here. Okay? And this does not depend on the quadrangulation. This comes from the fact that the number of vertices here is n plus 2. So therefore, the cardinality of this set is n plus 2 times the cardinality of Qn. And the cardinality of this is equal to 2 times the cardinality of Tn. And there we have an equality. Okay, so this is coherent. So now I have to explain how we can actually construct this bijection. Okay, I mean, knowing that a bijection exists is not per se an interesting thing. You want to know what this bijection does. Okay, so let us start from an element of this set, and for some time, for most of the discussion, I will forget about this second component here. Okay, so we start from a label tree. So so remember that maybe I should recall okay, maybe this is going to be more interesting. Okay, I should recall that a label tree is really a pair, so tau and L, okay, with tau an element of an, and L, well, it's a labeling function from tau to the integers, such that L of the root is equal to 0, and L of u minus L of u prime is less than or equal to 1 if u and u prime are neighbors. Okay? So again, when you go along an edge, then you can do a step of +1, 0, or -1. Okay? In this case, it's +1. Here it's -1. Here it's 0, and so on. Now, as I said, I really want to view tau as a planar map. Okay, it's a planar map with only one face. So what does it mean concretely? Well, remember that when you have a tree, you can do the contour exploration around this tree. And in terms of maps, what does that mean to do the contour exploration? Well, a tree is a map with only one face, and this face is a polygon bounded by oriented edges. And these oriented edges, they are just, the edges that you traverse when you do the contour order. Okay, the contour order is really what you do when you go along the unique face of the planar map coded by tau. Okay, it's more complicated than the exploration process by itself, but it's useful to have it in mind. Okay, so in doing so, okay, I will let E0, E1, E2, and so on up to E2n minus 1 be the oriented edges edges of tau visited in contour order, in the contour exploration. So if you want, EI is just the edge going from, I think the notation was VI, to VI plus 1, where VI is the ith vertex visited in the exploration. Okay? And remember, I want to consider also that each of these edges, so this is going to be E0, E1, E2, E3, E4, E5, E6, and so on. Remember that I want to consider corners, okay? Every edge, say E0, is going to be adjacent to this corner. E1 is going to be adjacent to this corner, and so on. Okay, so often I will, in fact, identify E with the incident corner. Okay. So now I want to extend a little bit this notation. So, you know, from the point of view of trees, you know, you stop the exploration when you are back at the starting point. But from the point of view of the map, it's also natural to continue indefinitely this exploration in a cyclic way. Okay, so we extend EI 0 less than I less than 2n to EI for I non-negative by periodicity. So EI is equal to EI plus 2n for every I. Okay? And also, I want to extend L of EI. It's just going to be, by definition, so this is the label of an edge. So in this sense, it doesn't make sense, but just define it as the label of the source vertex of EI. So it's just the label of VI. Okay? So if you remember, this is just equal to the contour, the label contour process of tau L, okay, as defined before. Okay, so now I have all set to describe what the bijection does. So it goes like this. So for every I, we let S of I be the infimum of all j's greater than I, such that the label of EJ is equal to the label of EI minus 1. So of course, you know, this set can be empty. In particular, if you know, EI is incident to a vertex with minimal label in the tree, then of course there is no other vertex which has a lesser label. So this is going to be the empty set, but okay, I don't mind. I mean, let's call infimum of the empty set to be infinity. Okay? Now I will perform the following construction. So it's going to be a graphic construction. So I'm going to start from this tree and try to obtain a quadrangulation. So first thing, I let V star be an extra vertex in S2. So again, tau is a planar map, so it's really embedded into the sphere. So I take V star an extra vertex in S2, not belonging, not in tau, so I should really say not in the support of tau. Okay, it does not belong to the vertices, but also not in the edges of tau. Okay, so this is an exterior vertex, and this is incident to a corner, a unique corner, which I call E infinity. Okay? And by convention, I will let S of EI. So in some sense, I extend the definition of this function S to the set of corners by letting S of EI to be E of S of I. Okay? That's for every I greater than or equal to 0. And here it's well defined, okay, because if S of I is equal to infinity, I say that I just have this corner E infinity here, okay? And I call it the successor of the corner EI. Okay, so now the construction goes like that. So let me draw the same tree again. Okay, so I have the tree, and then I add this extra vertex to the picture. So let's add it here, for instance. That's V star. It's incident to a corner E infinity. And by convention, let us put L of V star equal to L of E infinity equal to the minimum of all the labels in the tree minus 1. Okay, so it's just a convention, but somehow this is consistent with this definition here. Okay, so the label here will be minus 1, so this will be minus 2. Okay? So something that I didn't say before, but, you know, in fact, you should see that S of I is equal to infinity if and only if, in fact, L of EI is equal to this minimal label. Okay, of course, it's obvious in this way. You know, if L of I is a minimal label, then there is no other corner with strictly lesser label. In the other sense, it's sort of obvious because of the definition of label trees. Remember that label trees, the labels, when you go around the tree, they can only jump by -1 in the negative side. Okay? So this way, it's very easy to see that it's actually an equivalence. Okay. So this is the first step. And now, let us do the following thing. For every corner, so for every I in 0, 1, up to 2n minus 1, we draw an edge from the corner EI to the corner S of EI, the successor. Okay? And this edge, I want to call it an arc. Okay, and we let A be the set of arcs. So what does that mean? Okay, let's start from the first oriented edge E0, which is incident to this corner. We have to go around in the tree and find the first time where the label is equal to -1. Okay? So the first time is going to be this time here, and it's going to be the corner, so E0, E1, E2. It's going to be, if I'm not mistaken, sorry, E0, E1, E2, it's going to be E3, if I'm not mistaken. Okay? And what I do is I draw this orange arc between these two corners. Of course, when I do that, I should do it in such a way that I do not intersect the tree. Okay? It's not obvious a priori that it's possible, but it turns out to be possible. Okay. Now I'm at E1. I want to try to find the next corner with strictly lesser label. So I'm here, I mean, at this corner. And of course, the next corner with label 1 minus 1 equal to 0 is going to be this one. So I draw this arc here. Then I arrive at 0. The successor is going to be this one. Then I arrive at this corner E3. Well, in that case, you see I'm at -1, so there is no lesser label except this one. So I just draw an arc between these two guys. Okay? Now I'm back at 0, so this one is going to be linked to this one. So as you see, I've already visited 0 before, but at a different corner. Okay, I've already visited this vertex before, but it was at this corner E2. So now the successor of this corner is going to be this one. Okay? And I go on like this. Okay? Okay, sometimes I have to go around the tree, which means that, you know, it's important at that point that I did extend cyclically these edges here. Okay, so 1 goes to 0, 2 to 1, and then I'm done. Okay, I drew the arcs for all the vertices. Okay. So now here are a couple of facts. So fact 1. So it is possible to draw the arcs A in such a way that, let's say, this new graph with both the white and the orange edges is a planar map. So this new graph is really has vertex set tau union v star, and edge set the edges of tau union the arcs. Okay? So I'm not going to prove it in detail. So a proof is actually in the note with actually there is a mistake in the proof. So maybe I just comment on that briefly. The idea is that you should really see the tree again as, in fact, a polygon. It's a polygon with 2n boundary edges, which is glued on itself in order to get the two-dimensional sphere. So really, you should see the tree as the set of edges somehow. Let's draw the polygon in the exterior. So this is nothing in some sense. The disk is really around this picture, and the edges are here. Okay, so this is, say, E0, E1, E2, and so on. Okay, so this part here is really the unique face of the map. Now, in order to draw the arcs in such a way that you get a map, well, the only constraint, well, the first one is that the edges should be, I mean, you should obtain a connected graph, but this is obvious, okay, because, you know, I mean, this is just clear. But what is less clear is that you can draw the arcs in such a way that they do not cross each other, okay? But if you look at this picture, well, what it suffices to show is that you cannot find, well, 4 edges around this polygon. So say, let's say E1, E2, E3, E4, such that the successor of E1 is E3 and the successor of E2 is E4. Okay, you should have a non-crossing diagram of orange edges. Okay, and it is easy to see that it's the only way that things could go wrong in this picture. But now it's, you know, it's just a very plain. So the mistake in the note was that actually I said you can't find E1, E2, E3, E4 such that E3 is the successor of E1 and E4 is the successor of E2. Of course, something is missing. You should also say that E1, E2, E3, and E4 come in this cyclic order. Okay? Otherwise, it's just an empty statement. Okay? And then it's very simple because you see that if you have a label L here, then this successor here is labeled L minus 1. But also there is a constraint that all the labels in between should be larger than L. Okay, because if there was a label less than L minus 1, then the successor would arrive before. Okay, so all the labels here are larger than L. So L prime here is bigger than or equal to L. But then necessarily, the successor of this one should arrive before L minus 1. Okay, necessary, because if you went down to L minus 1, then you went under L prime before. Okay, so this is a contradiction. Okay, so this is the first fact. Now the fact number 2. Well, the graph, the embedded graph, so made now of the vertices of tau union V star and the set of arcs. So now I get rid of the white edges here. This is a planar quadrangulation. So it's quadrangulation. With n faces. Okay, so let me. Say it again, sorry.
The face containing 2, it's still a quadrangulation, but it uses edge 1 and 2 twice.
No, I mean, there is no face containing V star.
No, the face containing 2.
Containing 2. Oh, this one, yes. Oh, okay, yeah, good question. I mean, remember that, I get rid of the white edges, okay? So now I have these 2 gone here, and inside I have an edge here, but I should really count it twice.
Right.
So it is a quadrangle.
Yeah, no, I agree, but is that significant in any way, the fact that you use that edge twice?
What do you mean by significant?
Just the vertex at 1 kind of have to peel it open. Okay.
I mean, I didn't put any more topological constraint on the set in the definition of quadrangulations. For me, a quadrangulation is just, a set of polygons with glued boundaries, but you can, of course, glue the boundary of the same quadrangle to itself. And it's actually important. I mean, of course, you could be interested in other classes, and you would have also bijections. I mean, it's not so hard to write the constraint that the tree should satisfy in order that you don't get these pictures. But combinatorially, it's a more complicated object. It actually has been studied. Okay. Okay, so where was I? Yeah. Okay, so a quick comment on the second fact. There are 2 things to check. Well, the first thing is when you get rid of the edges of tau, you should be careful that you didn't disconnect your graph, okay? But then it's obvious, okay? Because if you start from any vertex, you just take a corner incident to this vertex and follow the orange arcs until you get to V star, okay? So every vertex is connected to V star, okay? So tau, okay, let's call it Q. So Q is connected. So every, say, corner E is connected to V star by a path going from E to its successor, from this successor to this successor, and so on, until you arrive at E infinity. Okay? So that's clear. So it's okay. The other thing is that you should check that all the faces are quadrangles. And it's not so hard to see, so maybe I can quickly sketch a proof of this. So are the face quadrangles? So I'm going just to give a picture for this. So consider one of the edges of the tree. Okay, so this is E. This is one of the corners belonging to the edges of tau. And let us suppose, just for illustration, that the labels here were, say, L plus 1 and L. Then, of course, this means that the successor of E is going to be the first edge following E in the contour order here. Okay, so I'm going to have an arc here. Now, if I go, so the tree continues like this, and then I go around the tree, and then I'm back at the tree. I'm back at the reversed edge here. And just before, sorry, no, I'm back at this edge here. So that's here. But then if I look at the successor of this corner, of E bar, then I will get to some place where with label L minus 1. Okay? And then let's look at the successor of the next edge coming after E bar. Well, obviously, the successor is going to be some vertex with label L, some corner with label L. But then, so this is S of E bar. But then the immediate consecutive successor of this one has to be this one, okay? Because this guy here is the first corner with label strictly lesser than L when going in the contour order here. So it has also to be the first one coming after this one, okay? Because if it came earlier, then I would have already an edge to this guy. Yes? Question? That was not obvious from my viewpoint. Okay, so necessarily, I have a picture like that. Okay, so I have a quadrangle here. Okay, and it's not hard to see that this quadrangle has to swallow only this edge of the tree. So for every edge of the tree, I have a quadrangle. In fact, I cheated a little bit because, okay, not completely. You could have a label L and L plus 1 here, but this would be just a symmetric case. But the only case remaining, which I didn't treat, is this one. So you have L and L. But then the picture is even simpler because the successor of this guy has to be some guy with label L minus 1 somewhere. And the successor of this guy has to be the same. And similarly on the other side. Okay? And this is again a quadrangle. Okay, I have 4 orange arcs bounding the face. So for every, let me put that straight. So for every edge of the tree, you know that there is one distinct face of this graph here, which is a quadrangle. But then you're done because what remains is there another face somewhere? But the point is that there can't be because of the Euler formula. Okay, you already know that this graph here. So let's note that the number of vertices of Q is the number of vertices of tau plus 1. Okay, the one corresponding to this extra vertex. So this is equal to n plus 1 plus 1. So this is n plus 2. So you know that. And of course, you know that the number of edges, well, the number of edges is just the number of arcs in the picture. So this is 2n, the same as the number of corners. So necessarily, you should have, by the Euler formula, you should have n faces. Okay? And here you have also n faces. So you found all of them. Okay? So get all n faces. Okay. So I'm now almost done in the description of the bijection. So what is missing now? So you will notice that here I didn't say that Q is an element of Qn. The reason is in this picture I don't have rooted, I don't have a rooted quadrangulation. There is something missing in this picture. What I really have is a distinguished vertex. Okay? So I'm close to an element of this Qn dot, which I defined earlier, which is here. Okay? What's missing is really the routing convention. But remember that, I should use some extra data, okay? And this is where it's coming in the picture. So routing. So let's say epsilon be a sign. Okay, it's plus or minus 1. And we root Q at the arc going from the successor of the first corner to the first corner if epsilon is equal to plus 1, and from E0 to its successor if epsilon is equal to minus 1. Can sound a little strange stated like that, why not the reversal, but it's actually, there are reasons for that. I don't want to go into detail. It's just a convention. So what does it mean? You have this first edge which you draw in the construction, and you have to choose its orientation and declare that it is the root. So, well, you say that the orientation is reversed from the successor to this guy if epsilon is equal to 1, and it's the straight orientation, the direct orientation if epsilon is equal to minus 1. Okay? So in this way, finally, okay, we get an element Q V star, which is really an element of rooted end-pointed quadrangulations. Okay? And this element, I want to call it phi of the tree tau L and the small epsilon that I needed. Okay? And I call phi is the Corriveau-Klein-Schaeffer bijection. Okay, so maybe I should say, I mean, I wrote the word bijection already, so let me state a theorem, which is, okay, it's hard to attribute, actually. It's, you know, it's basically the three guys. So theorem phi is a bijection from Tn times plus or minus 1 onto Qn dot. Okay, so I'm not making any more proofs. In particular, I won't say how you get back from the quadrangulation to the tree. It's actually going to be the subject of an example class, I guess the next one. But maybe from this picture, you could also guess what you should have to do. Okay, basically here you have all the faces. How do you get the white edges back from this orange picture? Okay, then trying to show that it's actually a bijection is a little work, but it's feasible. I mean, you have to really think about it. Okay. Okay, so the remaining 10 minutes or so, let me try to draw some consequences of this. Okay, so before going to random quadrangulations, I just want to make one very important comment, which is properties of the labels. So it's actually a basic property, but it motivates basically everything that's going to happen after that. So you will notice that in the construction here, so remember that in the quadrangulation, I forget in the end the white edges. Okay? But when you have done this picture, then you have the quadrangulation, but you have also the labels that are still there. Okay? So the question is, what do they mean? You know, the quadrangulation inherited the labels from the tree. And it turns out that these labels, well, they tell you something about the metric in the map. So it's a proposition. It's really a key proposition, which says that, so let Q V star be the image of a certain label tree tau L under the Corey-Vauquelin-Schaeffer bijection. So this is really tau L belonging to Tn and epsilon belonging to plus or minus 1. Okay? Then, well, remember that the set of vertices of Q, you should really see it as the tree tau itself, except for the distinguished vertex. Okay? So I will do this identification all the time. And it holds that for every V belonging to this set, P of Q distinct from V star, the graph distance inside Q between V and V star is equal to the label of V minus the mean of all the labels over tau plus 1. So if you want, I mean, you can also write it in this way, L of V minus L of V star, with the convention that I gave before, that L of V star should be the mean minus 1. Okay? So actually, in this setting, I mean, with this writing, I don't have to restrict myself to V different from V star. But anyway, let's put it like this. And then the proof actually is very easy. So let me give it. Well, you have to show something about the geodesic, the shortest path from a vertex V to V star. Well, you have, of course, an obvious path going from V to V star, and it's this one. Okay, starting from V, you take any corner incident to V, and then you just follow the successors until you go to E infinity, and then you can't take any more successors. It's not defined. Okay? So what is the length of this path? Well, along an arc, you just drop the label by 1. Okay, so you start from the label of V, you drop by 1, then drop by 1, and so on until you reach the smallest label, okay, which is the label, in fact, of L of V star, So the path, so let E be a corner of tau, incident to V. The path E, successor of E, successor squared of E, and so on, up to E infinity, has length L of V minus L of V star, okay, because the labels just drop by 1. Okay, so you have L of V minus 1, L of V minus 2, and so on, min L minus 1. So therefore, the distance, the graph distance between V and V star, well, it has to be less than that. But then my claim is that it has to be equal. And the reason is, now note that if, you know, U0, U1 up to UK is a chain, it's actually not a chain, you know, it's the set of vertices along a chain. The chain from U to V. You're laughing, but it's important. I mean, it's a chain from U to V, so not necessarily V star. Well, you know that you have L of Ui minus L of Ui minus 1, which has to be equal to 1, okay? Because, you know, since it's a chain, okay, I should say a chain in Q, in the quadrangulation. Since it's a chain in the quadrangulation, then these two guys are linked by an arc, okay? So therefore, the labels should differ by 1, just by definition. One of them is the successor of the other. Okay? One of the corners incident to this guy is a successor to corner incident to the other. So you have that. So therefore, when you sum this for I going from 1 to k, well, you obtain k. So you get k. And by the triangular inequality, this is greater than L of U0 minus L of UK. Okay, so you have actually this upper bound here. Okay, so therefore, by applying this to U and V with, say, apply this to U equal V star, okay, you get immediately the other bound. This is less than the length of any path going from V to V star. Okay, so L of V minus L of V star is less than k for any k length of a chain from V to V star. Okay, and we have, in fact, a little more here. We have an upper bound for any vertices, but we'll come back to that later. Okay, so this is really one of the, maybe the key properties, sorry, the key property of the Schaeffer bijection. So very quickly in the remaining 5 minutes, let me draw a consequence for random quadrangulations. Well, first of all, you know, it's a little unsatisfactory that, you know, I have to consider pointed quadrangulations. It's somehow a structure that I don't want, but at this point, it's not so important because we have, of course, this very plain statement. So first of all, let Qn be uniformly distributed in the set of rooted quadrangulations, okay? And conditionally given Qn, let V star, so I use the same notation with a, okay, be uniform in the set of vertices of Qn. Then Qn V star is uniform in Qn dot. Okay, that's an obvious exercise, but it's actually important. Considering random elements inside this is not more restrictive than considering, in fact, just random quadrangulations. Okay, I just somehow have to distinguish a particular point. And the second, it's even more obvious, maybe. So let Tn, ln and epsilon be uniformly distributed in the set of labeled trees times plus or minus 1. So it just means this is uniform in Tn, and then independently you take a Bernoulli random variable. Okay? Then phi of Tn ln epsilon is uniform in Qn dot. Okay? So this is saying that if you want to consider a random quadrangulation, well, you might as well say, okay, let's start from a tree, a labeled tree, apply the Schaeffer bijection, get a quadrangulation with a distinguished point, and forget this point. Okay? Right. Okay, so this being done, let's look now at a certain, quantity, a certain functional, somehow giving geometric information about these random elements of Qn. So for Qv belonging to Qn, we let R of Qv be the max of all the distances in Q from V to U, say for U belonging to V of Q. Okay, so it's natural to call that the radius of Q centered at V. Then we have the following theorem, which is due to Chassin and Schaeffer. Which says the following. So let Qn V star be uniform in Qn. Then, if you consider the radius of Qn viewed from V star, and you renormalize it by 8n over 9 to the 1/4, then this has to converge in distribution to the supremum of z of t minus the infimum of z of t for 0 less than t less than 1, where I should recall that E and Z is, E of Z is the Brownian snake, which was built in the previous lecture. Okay? So you remember that what is the Brownian snake? It's you should see it really as the Brownian motion along the Brownian tree, or if you want, it's a Gaussian process whose covariance function is itself random and given by an underlying Brownian excursion E. Okay, so you have this sort of two-step hierarchy of randomness, and well, it turns out that this radius asymptotically in distribution is related to the z by this simple formula. Okay, so the proof is really immediate. So I'm sorry, I'm going a little bit over time, but let me do it. So the proof that, well, if we use the proposition over there, we know that. So let me assume that Qn V star is just, we may assume, I should say, that Qn V star is the image of Tn ln epsilon, where this is uniform in Tn. Okay? So then I know that the distance in Qn from V to V star is equal to ln of V minus the mean of ln over the tree Tn plus 1. Okay? But then I can rewrite it in terms of Vn. So Vni being ln of ei 0 less than I less than 2n, the label process. Well, if you think about it, the maximal distance, I mean, all the vertices here, different from V star, are of the form, incident to a corner of some ei. So I just get that the max, I mean, the radius of Qn centered at V star is just the max of Vni for 0 less than I less than 2n, minus the minimum of all the labels, but this minimum is just the minimum of the label process, plus 1. Okay? And now you should remember, we simply use the fact that Vn of 2nt renormalized by 8n over 9 to the 1/4, this as a process of t between 0 and 1, this converges in distribution to the process Z, which was the main theorem of the previous lecture. Okay, so from this functional convergence, you immediately get the convergence of the supremum of the function and the infimum, and you indeed get this. Of course, this plus 1 here just gets forgotten. Okay, it's crushed by this. Okay, so this is really the first instance of scaling limit behavior for geometric aspect of planar maps. Okay, maybe I should just finish by giving a simple open question, simple to state, which is okay, radius. Okay, radius is fine. What about diameter? Well, of course, the diameter is less than twice the radius. Okay, so obviously, if you rescale the diameter by n to the 1/4, you get a tight sequence of distributions. But does it converge to a limiting random variable? At present, this is still open. Okay, so it's should maybe think about it. It's of course there is a difficulty that will come in the following lectures when we want to have a look at more refined properties of these maps. Okay, so I'll stop here. Thank you. Questions?
The label distribution, which is Gaussian, with the Higgs function distribution of the dynamic cover of this quadrilateration.
Okay, so yeah, well, the label process is not it's not Gaussian. In fact, it's Gaussian conditionally on some other structure. So it's it is not Gaussian. But then I mean, is there a relation with the height functions of Dymers models? I don't know. It's not really designed for that. If you see what I mean, it's it's really designed for studying distances in the graph, and usually distances in the graph are very different from other statistical properties of the graphs, like spanning trees and things like that. Yes, I mean you can actually see the Scheffer bijection as the result of a certain cutting of the tree along some interface, but this interface is related to the metric. It's somehow the way that the balls in this metric fold on themselves. Well, I can't comment further on that, but it's really designed for the metric, not really for other kind of statistical things. There are bijections, for instance, other similar kind of bijections between maps with a certain object on it, say a spanning tree, and combinatorial objects like trees. So, for instance, there is a very famous bijection by Bernardi. But it's telling you completely different information from the metric. Okay.